Teach e quite fortin. My heart shattered as my sister's venomous words sliced through the room. Happy 30th to our pathetic sister who still rents. Cruel laughter erupted while burning tears threatened to betray me. They mocked my poverty while unknowingly spending my fortune. My fingers trembled with rage as I sent the text that would end their perfect little charade forever. Initiate sunset clause. The champagne glass in my hand didn't move. My sister Isabel stood at the head of the long table, her flute raised so high the light from the chandeliers caught every bubble inside it, and 41 family members turned to look at me at once. I remember the specific sound of the laughter more than I remember the words. It rolled around the private room at the Holloway Club like something alive, something that had been waiting all night for permission to come out. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that gold-trimmed room understood, was that I had been paying for the room itself. I had been paying for Isabel's dress, for Uncle Ray's new truck, for my cousin Marcus's failing startup, for 3 years of my Aunt Paula's mortgage. Every one of them was standing on a foundation I had built for them in secret, and every one of them was using that foundation to kick me while I was down. My name is Vanessa Hail. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a textile conservator at a small private museum most people have never heard of. This is the story of the night my family finally saw who I really was, and the year it took for them to understand what that meant. I need to take you back before I can explain what happened at that dinner, because none of it makes sense without the history underneath it. I grew up the middle child in a family that ran on comparison the way other families run on love. My father, Desmond Hale, made his money quietly, decades before any of us understood what quietly meant. He held 3 patents connected to industrial adhesives, unglamorous things nobody at a dinner party wants to hear about, and those patents paid licensing fees that multiplied for 30 years without anyone outside our immediate family knowing the real numbers. My mother, Celia, came from old money on paper and older taste in practice. She collected antique textiles the way some women collect shoes, quietly, patiently, with an eye that only revealed itself decades later when appraisers started using words like museum quality and irreplaceable. I was closest to my mother growing up. While Isabel chased attention in dance recitals and pageants, and our brother Theo chased approval on the football field, I sat beside my mother in her sewing room, learning the difference between silk damask and silk brocatelle, learning how to read the age of a thread by the way it had been spun. She used to say I had patience nobody else in the family had inherited. I didn't understand until much later that patience was the exact quality that would let me survive what came next. My parents died when I was 23. A small plane, a private pilot friend of my father's, a storm that came in faster than the forecast promised. Isabel was 26. Theo was 28. I was the youngest, and somehow, in a decision none of us saw coming, I was the one named executor and primary beneficiary of a will neither of my siblings knew the full contents of. The public version of our family's finances was modest. A comfortable house, a small life insurance payout, some furniture nobody wanted. That was the story everyone believed, including, for a long time, Isabel and Theo themselves. The real version, laid out over 11 pages by our family attorney in a conference room I still remember every detail of, was different. My father's patent income alone was worth more than either of my siblings had ever guessed. My mother's textile collection, appraised piece by piece over 8 months, came in at a number that made the attorney clear his throat twice before reading it aloud. Everything, all of it, had been left to me, with a single handwritten instruction from my mother clipped to the front of the will. Take care of them, Vanessa. But don't let them know it's you. Let them earn who they become. I have never in my life followed an instruction more completely or paid a higher price for it. For the next 5 years, I built a quiet architecture around my family's lives without a single one of them knowing my hand was behind it. I set up a private trust, the Hale Family Legacy Trust, with a name generic enough that nobody asked questions and a structure opaque enough that no casual search would connect it to me. I hired a financial advisor named Solomon Reyes, a careful, discreet man who had worked with my father for over a decade before his death, and together we built a system of anonymous distributions that looked, from the outside, like ordinary good fortune. Isabel wanted to open a boutique fitness studio. She had no savings and a credit history that made every bank she approached say no. An anonymous investor, arranged quietly through Solomon, provided the seed capital. When the studio nearly collapsed 18 months later, a second anonymous infusion kept the lights on. Isabel told everyone at every family gathering for years that she had built her business from nothing through sheer grit, and every single person at that table believed her, including, for a long time, me watching her believe it about herself. Theo needed help differently. He had married young, had 2 children quickly, and worked a modest job in logistics that never quite covered the life he wanted to give his kids. The trust quietly covered the down payment on his house. It quietly covered 2 years of his younger daughter's medical bills after a diagnosis that could have bankrupted him. Theo never asked questions about the mysterious hospital billing adjustments that kept appearing on his statements. He simply thanked whatever version of luck he believed in and moved forward. Uncle Ray's gambling debts were settled twice through what looked, on paper, like a clerical resolution at his lender. Aunt Paula's mortgage arrears disappeared through a program she believed was a pandemic relief initiative she had simply been lucky enough to qualify for. Cousin Marcus's failing marketing agency received 2 rounds of anonymous angel funding that kept 11 employees paid and Marcus's ego thoroughly intact. I did all of this from a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner, driving a car I bought used with cash, wearing clothes I bought on sale because I genuinely did not care about appearances and because, I will admit now, some small, unexamined part of me wanted to see what they thought of me when they believed I had nothing behind me at all. The answer, over 5 years, became increasingly clear and increasingly cruel. Family dinners became a ritual of comparison where I was always the punchline. Isabel would announce her studio's newest location while glancing at me with a small, practiced pity. Theo would talk about his daughter's private school with a slight emphasis, as if daring me to explain why I, unmarried and childless, hadn't accomplished the same milestones. Aunt Paula started introducing me to strangers as the one who does something with old fabric, her voice always dipping slightly on old fabric, as though the words themselves were an apology she was making on my behalf. I told myself, for years, that it didn't matter. I told myself that my mother's instruction had been a kind of gift, a chance to watch my family build lives on ground I had quietly poured for them, and that eventually, someday, something in them would recognize it, would soften, would simply become kinder because kindness didn't cost anything and I had given them everything else. I was wrong, and my 30th birthday was the night I finally admitted it to myself. Isabel planned the dinner. She insisted on planning it, actually, over my mild protest that something small would be fine. She booked the private dining room at the Halloway Club, the kind of room with white tablecloths and a view of the river, the kind of room that cost more for 4 hours than I spent on rent in 2 months. She invited 43 people. She hired a photographer, she told me later, for the memories. I should have known from the seating chart alone. I was placed at the far end of the table, near the kitchen doors, beside my second cousin's +1, a stranger I had never met before that night. Isabel sat at the head, naturally, in a dress I recognized, with some distant private amusement, as one I had unknowingly paid for 8 months earlier when her line of credit ran dry before a launch event. The dinner moved the way these dinners always moved. Compliments flowed toward Isabel's newest studio location. Theo's daughters performed a small dance for the table that everyone applauded like it was a Broadway debut. Marcus talked, at length, about a funding round he called organic growth, seed money he had absolutely no idea had come from me. Uncle Ray, 3 bourbons in, told a story about his new truck that conveniently skipped the part where his old one had been repossessed the year before I quietly cleared his debt with the lender. I ate my salmon slowly and said very little, the way I always did at these dinners, the way that had somehow, over the years, become confused in everyone's mind with having nothing to say. Then Isabel stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon, the sound cutting cleanly through the noise, and the whole room turned toward her the way rooms always turn toward Isabel. She smiled, the practiced smile she used for her studio's promotional videos, and lifted her champagne toward me. "Happy 30th to our pathetic sister who still rents," she said, and the room erupted into the kind of laughter that comes easily to people who have never once questioned whether their comfort was owed to someone else's silence. I felt the heat climb up my chest before I understood what was happening to my own body. My skin prickled. The chandelier light suddenly seemed too sharp, each crystal throwing tiny points of glare across the table like something designed specifically to make me flinch. Seriously though, Isabel continued, warming to her audience, 30 years old, still in that little studio apartment, still doing the fabric thing, still single. When are you going to actually build something, Vanessa? I'm a textile conservator, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. I preserve pieces most museums can't afford to lose. Right, playing with old blankets while the rest of us actually build careers. She gestured broadly around the table, at Theo, at Marcus, at Aunt Paula. Look at everyone here. Real businesses, real houses, real lives. And you're still exactly where you were 5 years ago. Theo shifted in his seat and did not meet my eyes. He, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable, though not enough to say anything. Some people are just built to hold the ladder for everyone else, Uncle Ray said, raising his glass toward me with a lazy, bourbon-soaked grin. Nothing wrong with that, Vanessa. Somebody's got to be at the bottom. Exactly, Isabel said, delighted. Though I do wonder sometimes what Mum and Dad would think. They worked so hard to give us every opportunity, and here I am, running an empire, and you're just, what's the word? Stagnant. The word landed exactly where she had aimed it. My parents had been dead for 7 years, and Isabel had never once, in that entire time, asked me a single question about the estate beyond her own modest inheritance, because she genuinely believed there was nothing more to ask about. She believed the lie my mother had built for her own good. A toast, Isabel said, lifting her glass higher, turning to the room. To Vanessa, who proves that not everyone has to succeed. Every family needs a cautionary tale. 42 glasses rose around that table. Mine did not. I felt something inside me, something I had been carefully, deliberately holding still for 5 years, finally come loose. Thank you for the memories, I said, and my voice did not shake. Oh, don't be dramatic, Isabel laughed, already turning back to her champagne. This isn't goodbye. You're stuck with us. It's not like you have anywhere else to spend the holidays. I reached into my clutch, found my phone beneath the small mirror I never used, and typed 4 words to Solomon Reyes, words we had agreed on 2 years earlier during a quiet conversation in his office where I first admitted, out loud, that a day like this might eventually come. Initiate sunset clause? Checking your rent notifications? Isabel called out, unable to resist one final jab as I set my phone face down beside my untouched champagne. I know a girl looking for a roommate if the budget's getting tight. That's very kind, I said, standing, smoothing the napkin from my lap onto the table with a care that felt strange given how loudly my own heart was beating. But I think I'll be fine. Where are you even going? We haven't done cake. I'm tired, I said, and it was the truest thing I had said all night. Thank you all for coming. It's been illuminating. I left them there, 43 people laughing under chandeliers I had unknowingly paid for, in a room I had unknowingly paid for, celebrating lives built entirely on a foundation of my own silence. The drive home took 11 minutes. I spent every one of them staring at red lights longer than necessary, feeling something between grief and a strange, terrifying relief settle into my chest. My apartment, the one Isabel had mocked without knowing its truth, was not the studio she imagined. It was the top 2 floors of a converted textile warehouse I had purchased 4 years earlier under an LLC that traced back to nothing recognizable, designed deliberately to look modest from the street, its true scale hidden behind a plain brick facade and a single unmarked buzzer. I climbed the private elevator to my floor, poured a glass of water instead of the wine I wanted, and sat by the window overlooking the river until nearly 2 in the morning, waiting. Isabel's first call came at 8:41 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 4 minutes later, then twice more before 9. I finally answered on the 5th attempt, coffee in hand, watching the early light move slowly across the water. What did you do? Her voice cracked somewhere between fury and panic. Good morning to you too, I said. What seems to be the problem? Don't. The studio's line of credit. It's frozen. The landlord says the lease guarantor pulled out overnight. What is going on? That's strange, I said, keeping my voice carefully even. I wasn't aware you had a guarantor at all. I thought you built the studio from nothing, through sheer grit. Silence stretched on the line long enough that I could hear her breathing change. There's also, she continued, quieter now, there's an email about an investor, someone called Hail Family Legacy Trust. They're saying they're withdrawing support effective immediately. I don't know anything about that, I said. Maybe you should call your accountant. I did. He says the trust has been the primary silent backer of the studio since it opened. Vanessa, that can't be. That would mean what, Isabel? The pause this time was long enough that I finished half my coffee waiting for it. It was you, she whispered. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said. I'm just the pathetic sister who still rents, remember? How exactly would I have the money to back a fitness empire? But if it was you, why would you never say anything? Maybe, I said, my voice finally steady in a way it hadn't been the night before. Someone wanted to know if her family would ever love her without a price tag attached. Maybe she wanted to see, just once, if she'd be treated like a person instead of a punchline. We didn't know, Isabel said, and I could hear the tears starting now. Real ones, not the practice kind she used for her promotional videos. You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a difference. You built an entire identity on money that appeared out of nowhere, and you never once asked where it came from, because asking might have meant admitting you owed someone gratitude instead of contempt. By the time I hung up, my phone was already buzzing with names I hadn't spoken to directly in months. Theo, Aunt Paula, Marcus, Uncle Ray. Word, it seemed, travelled through that family faster than anything else ever had. Theo's call came an hour later, quieter than Isabel's, more careful. The mortgage assistance program, he said without preamble. The one that covered Emma's hospital bills. They're saying it's connected to something called the Hail Family Trust. Vanessa, is that you? What do you think? Theo, I think, he said slowly. I think I never once asked how a random government program knew exactly which of my daughter's bills to cover, down to the dollar. I think I didn't want to look too closely at good luck because I was scared it would disappear if I did. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years, and it very nearly cracked the careful composure I had built for this exact conversation. It's gone now, I said instead. All of it. Every account, every quiet arrangement, every anonymous kindness I extended without a single one of you knowing my name was attached. As of last night, it's finished. Why now? Theo asked, and there was no accusation in it, only genuine confusion. What happened? Your sister stood up at my birthday dinner in front of 43 people and toasted me as a cautionary tale, I said. She called me pathetic in a room I was paying for, wearing a dress I was paying for, surrounded by a life I built for her with my own 2 hands and never once asked credit for, and you sat there and said nothing. Theo was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, he finally said. I should have said something. I've been saying something for years in my head and never once out loud. That afternoon, they arrived at my door together. Isabel first, her makeup streaked, followed by Theo, Uncle Ray, and Marcus, all of them wearing the particular stunned expression of people who have just discovered the ground beneath them was never solid at all. I let them in. They stopped just past the entryway, the way I somehow knew they would, taking in the space Isabel had spent 5 years assuming didn't exist. The floor-to-ceiling windows over the river. The climate-controlled cases holding pieces of my mother's collection that museums had offered me 7 figures for, and I had refused every single time. The quiet, obvious, undeniable evidence that the pathetic sister who still rents had, in fact, never been pathetic at all. You never said, Isabel whispered, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I tried, I said. 3 years ago, at Thanksgiving, I mentioned I'd made some good investments. You laughed and told everyone I probably meant a savings bond from Grandma. I didn't know, she said again, and this time it sounded less like an excuse and more like the beginning of understanding. You never asked, I said. None of you ever asked a single real question about my life. You just decided who I was and mocked me for it for 5 years while living entirely inside a life I built for you in silence. So what happens now? Isabel asked, sinking onto the arm of a chair she clearly no longer felt she had permission to sit in properly. You let us lose everything? I'm not letting you do anything, I said. I'm simply stepping back. You are all adults. You will figure out how to stand on your own, the way I had to learn to stand on mine, quietly, without anyone catching me when I fell. But we're family, Uncle Ray said, the only argument any of them seemed to have left. Then start acting like it, I said. Learn something real about my life that isn't attached to a dollar amount. Ask about my work without calling it playing with old fabric. Remember my birthday without a calendar reminder. Treat me like a person you actually know, not a punchline you've been using for 5 years to feel better about your own lives. They left eventually, quiet and shaken in a way I had never once seen any of them, and I closed the door behind them feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, exactly. Something closer to exhaustion mixed with the strange, unfamiliar lightness of finally putting down something I had been carrying alone for far too long. The months that followed unfolded slower than any of them expected and faster than any of them were prepared for. Isabel's studio, stripped of its silent backing, closed 2 locations within 6 weeks. She took a job managing a gym she used to consider beneath her, learning, for the first time in her adult life, what it meant to build something with only her own 2 hands behind it. Uncle Ray sold the truck and moved into an apartment smaller than the one he had spent years mocking me for living in, though he never once, to his credit, brought up the old jokes again. Marcus's agency downsized from 11 employees to 3, and Marcus himself started answering his own phones for the first time in years. Theo was different. Theo called me every few weeks, not to ask for anything, but simply to talk, awkwardly at first, about small things. His daughter's school projects, a book he was reading. He asked, once, tentatively, what my actual favourite part of conservation work was, and when I told him about the quiet satisfaction of stabilising a 200-year-old textile so it could survive another 2 centuries, he actually listened, all the way through, without once checking his phone. Aunt Paula sent a card 6 months later, the kind with no request folded inside it. Just a short note saying she had started volunteering at the local library and thought of me every time she handled an old book carefully. It was the first time in 5 years anyone in my family had connected something about themselves to something I actually loved, without me having to explain it first. Isabel reached out last, almost a year to the day after that birthday dinner. She asked to meet for coffee, insisting on paying, even though I knew, by then, exactly how carefully she was budgeting every dollar she earned honestly for the first time in her adult life. "I've been thinking about what you asked," she said, turning her cup slowly on the small table between us. "What makes you happy?" I didn't have an answer that night. I do now. I waited. "You light up talking about the history and things," she said quietly. The stitching, the repairs someone made 100 years ago, the stories sewn into fabric nobody else even notices. I used to hear you talk about it and just wait for you to finish so I could talk about something that mattered to me. I'm sorry, not sorry the money's gone. Sorry it took losing it for me to actually see you. We are not close, not the way sisters in movies become close after a single tearful conversation. Too much silence, too many years of casual cruelty cannot be undone over 1 cup of coffee. But we are honest now, in a way we never were before. And honesty, I have learned, is worth infinitely more than the comfortable lie I spent 5 years quietly funding. I still live in the same converted warehouse by the river. I still work with pieces of history most people will never think twice about. The only thing that has changed is that when someone in my family asks what I do now, they actually wait to hear the answer. The toast Isabel raised that night to our pathetic sister who still rents turned out to be true in a way she never intended. I do still rent, in a sense. I rent space in people's lives, quietly, patiently, the way I always have. The difference now is that the people still standing in that space are finally earning it, one honest conversation at a time, instead of simply assuming it was owed to them. If you were in my position, would you have kept the silence going, or would you have cut the strings the same way I did? Let me know in the comments, and if this story meant something to you, make sure to like and subscribe for more.